My name is Sarah, and I am a licensed professional counselor. I work at the Eden's Counseling Group. I do EMDR therapy, so I specialize in trauma therapy, but I also do a lot of work with anxiety. So what we're going to be focusing on today specifically is how to manage thoughts related to anxiety, right? And we're going to kind of do this in a little bit of a story form, and then we're going to throw in some tips and things that we can do in between there. So the first thing I want to talk about kind of is what, like, specifically parts of anxiety we're going to be covering today, right? So when I'm talking about intrusive thinking patterns, what I mean is like the thoughts that just pop up into your head out of nowhere that are either related to something that's happening now, or thoughts that are seemingly unrelated, and the stuff that we just like think of whenever. And obviously intrusive thoughts in this situation are ones that are more geared towards feelings of anxiety and not necessarily intrusive thoughts about like unicorns and rainbows, because if not, you know, why would you be here? So and then we're going to kind of get into how sometimes with those intrusive thoughts we can get into like loops where it feels like kind of like a depending on how fast it is, but mostly a feeling of not being able to get out of the intrusive thought once you are into it. So I wanted to start today with a little bit of an exercise, and what we're going to do is kind of like an I Love Lucy thing. So this is actually a little bit of a mindfulness technique, and for those of you who haven't seen this, I kind of apologize, but there's an episode of I Love Lucy where she is like, she's working at a chocolate factory, and there's a conveyor belt that kind of comes around with different chocolates on it, and it starts happening like faster and faster and faster, and she ends up shoving the chocolates in her hat and in her shirt, and it's like, you know, a pretty regular I Love Lucy moment. But for this exercise, what I'm going to have us do when we start is I'm going to take like 1 minute, and then what I want you to do is to imagine that each chocolate on a conveyor belt, if it was kind of passing you by, would be a thought, right? So let's say that we started this exercise and then all of a sudden I had a thought like, I'm hungry, or I had a thought like, I don't know, but whatever the thought was, right? Like we just kind of passed them by. Then we grab the thought and we kind of put it onto a chocolate, and we decide in those moments, is this something that I want to pick up and chew on or stuff in my hat or put in my shirt? Or is this something that I'm just going to kind of let go by, right? Because one thing about anxiety that's really important to remember is that even though there are thoughts that anxiety is a normal feeling, but I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't have to believe everything that we think, right? A thought is just a thought. And so being able to challenge the things that are kind of coming up for you is really important, because it helps to have you like identify where you want to put your energy, but also it helps you pick what things you might want to reframe, right? And that's something we're going to be going over also. So what I would like for you to do is for the next minute, to yourself, if that's something that you want to participate in, just kind of close your eyes, take a deep breath. And then I just want you to focus on your breathing. And as you notice thoughts coming up, and they will, because distraction is normal and intrusive thoughts are also, then I want you to kind of place the thought on the chocolate and then let it go by. Okay, so my first question for you is, and I'm only going to answer the kind of questions as they come as they come up, but did anybody notice anything interesting while they were noticing their thoughts go by? I didn't have thoughts. That's good. I think I didn't have thoughts is okay. That would just mean that you were able to focus on your breath or focus on the exercise, and then that's good. If you were able to do that, like continue, if you did have thoughts that were intrusive for you, continuing to practice the exercise is something that helps you become more aware of your thoughts as something that you watch instead of something that that is just kind of overwhelming you. Metacognition, so like the idea of having thoughts about your thoughts, is an important way to start to manage anxiety, because when we are unaware of what an impact thoughts have on our behaviors and our emotions, then we are less able to kind of figure out how we can reframe them. Okay, so the thing that we're going to do next is we're going to play a little game called Let's Pretend. So we're going to walk through some situations in which I might talk to clients or things that people have told me about that they've been kind of anxious about, and how we might work on working through those things. I think I need to move this thing, sorry. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is like, let's pretend we're at a grocery store, right? And I know that some of these scenarios aren't going to be applicable for everybody, but the idea is that you can use any anxious or like any intrusive thought with these exercises and they'll still apply. So let's pretend we're at a grocery store and you're there looking for bread because somebody sent you for some and you can't find the thing that you're looking for specifically. And so then you have to ask somebody, right? Except that the idea of asking somebody to help you with something, it is something that makes you feel anxious. So maybe when you would come in to talk to me, what you would say is, I'm having trouble asking people for things. This isn't something that I'm very comfortable with. I don't want to burden anybody with anything. What if they're mad? What if they're angry? What if and these are thoughts that we have in our head that we generally don't talk about out loud, but are still important to really get into the meat of. So what we would work on then is identifying cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are the thoughts that we have and the irrational thoughts that we have that can influence your emotional state, right? So an example in that story about a cognitive distortion would be the automatic thought that if you ask somebody for a question, that would be burdening them, right? If that's something that you came to me with, that's what I would identify with that. And I'm not saying that it's not possible that you would be, because I also recognize that when people have anxiety, it's not like anxiety that comes out of nowhere or anxious thoughts that don't make any sense. Like I have anxiety, I've had generalized anxiety for my entire life. And one thing I know is that people, when they have anxious thoughts, it's relevant. Like, yeah, of course, you could be a bird. That could definitely happen. And so we're not trying to take away from the experience that you might have or the thoughts that you might have that could be true. And the reason that we don't try to do that is because I think if we do, nobody would believe it. Like if I told you I thought the worst case scenario was going to happen and you told me it definitely wasn't, I would be like, okay, sure it wasn't. But in my head, I would think, but it could happen. So that's not very helpful. So what we're trying to get to in this is not a place where we kind of challenge our thoughts into a place that's like unicorns and rainbows, but a place where we can challenge our thoughts into a place where we at least decrease the amount of anxiety that we're experiencing so that it's manageable or tolerable, or so that we give ourselves kind of a chance to see what options there are for us, right? So if you came into the session and you were telling me that you were having an experience, you were having some trouble like that, what we would do was identify what the cognitive distortion was. So in this instance, it might be like catastrophization, like thinking of only the worst possible outcomes of a situation. It could be fortune telling, like believing that you that you can tell the things that are going to happen. Like you could tell that somebody, if you ask somebody something, they would look at you and be like, absolutely not. I'm not going to help you find groceries, which is something that when we have anxiety, we think is definitely a possibility. Like that could happen. So, so then after that, we figure out one of the techniques that you can use is I'm sorry. my cat just kind of ran across the thing, and that was a little bit distracting for me. But in those moments, one of the exercises that we can use is like 3 positive or neutral options for something else that could happen. So I know this is like at a low scale, but when you're going to ask somebody something, the idea, like, they're not going to want to help me, I can't ask this, I should know how to find it myself, whatever it is that comes up, like the positive or neutral options could be something like, or I could ask them and everything might be okay. Or I could ask them and they can help me get to the thing I want. Or I could ask them and maybe they would say no. And then what would happen to me then, right? And so we just kind of question what are other possibilities that could happen instead of the thing that we're sure is, right? So the first time I learned this, it was another therapist that taught me, actually. And I was dating somebody who I wasn't answering his phone. And this is normally not really a big deal, but because of things that have happened in my past, right, which is true with a lot of people with anxiety. And that's what I mean when I say that this stuff isn't coming from nowhere, right? People experience anxiety because bad things have happened. The issue is that then our brains kind of jump to the extremes of bad things happening when they might not need to based on the exact situation, right? So I imagined in my head, bad things happening, this guy's dead, he got arrested, I have literally no idea. And my therapist was like, what else could happen? And when she kind of posed that question to me, I thought, I don't know. I told you the options already, like jail. And she was like, other options? And I was like, I don't know, maybe he's stuck in a ditch somewhere. And she was like, maybe you can think of something else. And then I thought, or his phone could be dead, I guess. But like, even just challenging myself in those immediates was kind of challenging. And so again, this isn't going to be something that maybe makes you feel 100% better, but it is something that can definitely help, so that you start to kind of question the immediate belief that the thing you think is definitely the thing that's going to happen. And that's important in anxiety, because people with anxiety, although we are very good at telling when tones change, when faces change, when somebody comes into the room, we feel like your energy is off. The issue is that we have tendencies toward jumping to conclusions. And because we jump so quickly, our answer is sometimes wrong. So so when people with anxiety, like somebody comes in and they have an angry face, and then we're like, you have an angry face. Did something happen? Did I do something? Should I have done something different? Did I forget something? Are they mad at me? We can tell that something is happening, but also a good technique is just waiting a little bit longer, right? Like waiting a little bit longer and trying to assume that that might not actually have anything to do with you, because people can have their own emotional states that don't affect ours, except that when we are in an anxious state, that's not really how we might see things, right? So then maybe we could come to like another one, right? Like, let's say I was a parent, right? Or I was taking care of somebody's kid. I was in the middle of a grocery store, and then my kid starts throwing a fit, right? Which is something that kids do, or they start crying, or they're upset, or they want something, and then I'm upset. And then people start looking at us because the kid is crying. And all of a sudden I'm flooded with thoughts about how, like, intrusive thoughts, right? About how they don't think I'm doing a good job. They must think I'm a bad parent. They must think that I don't know how to discipline my kid, or that maybe we should leave, right? So you have all of these thoughts about all of the things that people could think about us. And if that's something that you kind of struggle with, one of the things that you can do in that situation is figure out what evidence you have for or against the thought that you're having, right? So let's say that in that situation, your evidence for that thing happening would be like, well, people are looking at me, right? So in session, what we would do is kind of talk about like, okay, well, what happened? Why did you think that people would be mad at you? And then, or like, what was it? What did you pick up? What kind of signals were you getting? And people will say like, well, they were looking at me. And that's your evidence for, right? But if we did evidence against, it could also be like, what other things could have happened? Like, is it possible that they're looking at you because they also have kids and they empathize with the situation, or that they started looking in your direction because they heard a noise, and that's generally what people do? Or that maybe they would be looking in direction, but in a few minutes, you're not going to be in that situation anymore, and you're never going to see those people again. And like, those are the ways we kind of move through this, right? Another way that you can work on like evidence-based cognitive behavioral techniques is by, let's say that you have an intrusive thought that just comes up out of nowhere, like something that you're afraid will happen. Like if you're going to a party, or you're walking into a room with people you don't know, or even sometimes people you do know, and you just have a thought, like you say something dumb and you're like, great, now I'm done. Nobody likes, like, people aren't going to like me, or they're mad at me, or nobody is going to invite me to anything anymore because I'm so awkward all the time. And what we would do in those situations would be like, okay, well, if that's what you feel, like if that's what's going on, the thought that's happening in your head is, I made a mistake and now people are mad at me, then what we would do is, okay, like, what is your evidence that people are mad at you? And sometimes we have something, and sometimes we don't. But if you also had something that, what was your evidence that they weren't? It could be, options could be like, well, they didn't actually say that they were mad at me, or something like they have invited you to things before, and so what would be the reason that they wouldn't anymore? Or that you've been friends with them for a really long time, that maybe they could be mad about something else that didn't have anything to do with you. So there are a lot of options here for like ways that you can play essentially lawyer, right? In that game, you're playing lawyer, and judge, and you are ultimately the person that gets to decide what seems like it's backed by evidence and what seems like it's not. Because again, one of the really important things we have to remember in anxiety is that not everything we think is true, and not everything we feel is true. And that doesn't mean it's not valid, or that we don't accept the thought and kind of sit with it and allow that to pass naturally. But that also means that managing our thoughts so can help kind of decrease the feelings of anxiety that we get in those kinds of moments. Let's see, I'm trying to pull like ideas from things that I hear people talk about a lot. So that's kind of another reason that I went with something where people would be mad at me, because I think one of the major things that people have anxiety like with or around is in relation to our relationships with people and our ability to say no. Yeah, and the expectations that we have for ourselves, right? So if we then kind of move into intrusive thinking patterns, right? Some of these things don't happen from like an actual event, right? These are just thoughts that like pop into your head. One of the things I notice when people first start to come to talk to me about intrusive thinking patterns is that people are afraid that the thoughts are real, are that there's something wrong with them for the thoughts that they're having that are intrusive, right? And it can be that there's something wrong with them about them, or something wrong about something like somebody that you're in a relationship with. But everybody thinks all kinds of things all the time. Like whatever thought you have is okay. And if you're able to accept thoughts as just thoughts, then it kind of decreases, like it takes away some of the pressure that you feel from having that. Because if we like just add, I'm anxious about the anxious thought that I had, we're just building anxiety onto what it is that we're doing. So giving yourself a little grace in those moments, and recognizing that we don't have any control over the thoughts that pop up into our head, which I know because I have tried to do and it is not effective. And also because in anything that I've read, we just don't. And so we don't have control over the first thought that pops in, but sometimes we can like build second automatic thoughts onto the first thoughts. So in practicing identifying what kinds of thoughts that you're having, you can, as I said that, I totally realized that I completely forgot to even talk about what cognitive distortions were. So cognitive distortions are irrational thoughts that can influence your emotions. As a side note, there's a list. If you Google like cognitive distortions anywhere, the list is basically the same. It'll have stuff like catastrophizing, which is the thinking worst case situation, the fortune telling, mind reading, like believing that we know what we feel or what other people are thinking without like asking them about anything like that, or feeling like we are like I did a bad thing, therefore I must be a bad person. There's a list of about 10 of them, so we're not going to overview all of them right now. But I wanted to let you know that's a really good resource if it's something that you wanted to look into. Reframing cognitive distortions is an amazing skill. There's an app that's called Sanvello. It's spelled Sanvello. If you use that app, like you can write it down or you can use the app, but it also has a list of the distortions in the part of the app that has thoughts, and it will walk you through ways to reframe cognitive distortions. It's really helpful. While you're learning to do this, it's important to really stick with it, especially in the first couple of weeks, because what happens is when we build anxious thoughts, like this is something that I'm assuming a lot of people have been doing for their whole lives. Like you are not strangers to anxiety. So that means that the neural connections toward anxious thoughts are strong. Like every time we do it, we strengthen the connection. So when we start to question that, it's like slowly turning a wheel that has been turning for the entire time you have been experiencing these kinds of thoughts. And so in challenging these distortions, what we're doing is trying to like slowly turn the wheel the other way so we can strengthen neural connections toward like reframing the thought or seeing if there's any evidence for it or questioning if there are other options. But since we haven't thought that way in a long time, it takes a little bit of work to get to it. And then eventually you'll be able to kind of do it more in your head and then use like reframing exercises or things that happen just like on the, like just for things that you might need to write down if it's like really serious, you're kind of getting jumbled in your thoughts and you're having trouble identifying the thing that is making you anxious. If you start with something small, like let's say that you're anxious about, sending back food that like you ordered and then it came back wrong, right? I think that's something that people experience anxiety about. So, and in your head, you're like, no, I can't send back this food. Like, why can't I send back this? Well, it's rude, right? Like sending back this food seems rude. And then they're gonna be mad at me. And then what if they go into the kitchen and they tell the guy in the kitchen, and then the guy in the kitchen is mad at me, and then I can never come back to this place again. And then that like, and I know that that's how anxious thoughts kind of work, right? And sometimes we're not aware that that's what's happening, but that's the places that we get to. We assume so many things about what's going to happen step by step, right? And so in using the cognitive distortions to reframe things, we can identify like, okay, if my thing was, I don't want to send the food back because then the waitress will be mad at me, right? That's a reframe there, because there also could be other options for what could happen. Like, yeah, she could be mad, or she could be totally cool because people send back food in places all the time, right? Or sure, and then she could be mad and then she could tell the chef, and then maybe the chef would be mad, or maybe he would be like, oh my bad, that was the wrong thing. Let's see what happens now. Or nothing could happen. So, and we have to kind of challenge that so that we're able to kind of move toward more behaviors that we would like to do instead, because letting our anxiety lead all of our choices and our behaviors is exhausting. And anxiety is exhausting anyway. So giving ourselves a chance to experience other opportunities can be really helpful in managing that. Okay, let's see. Another one that I kind of thought of was like, let's say you have a meeting with your boss, right? And they just sent you an email and it said, hey, can I talk to you at 1? I booked an appointment with you, right? And so then all of a sudden the thing in your head is like, first heart starts beating and then you start getting kind of tense, and then the thoughts are like, did I do something wrong? What is the thing that I did? Did I do what I was supposed to do? Is she gonna fire me? Am I gonna get fired? Like, right? And so it jumps, like it goes from I need a meeting to I'm gonna get fired and live on the streets and possibly be homeless, and this is going to be the end. And that's how anxiety works. Another important thing when you're trying to manage anxious thoughts is that we have to get to the part at the end of the anxious thought. Like if we don't get to the part where the answer is, and then I'm going to be fired, it's difficult. Like, and that's part of the core fear, right? Like, I'm going to be fired. I'm not going to be able to provide. This is going to be an issue with my family. And so we have to identify those things, because that's where some of the core issues are, right? Like in the fear of what we think the worst case thing would mean for us. And then so once we get to that place, identifying the distortion can be helpful. So like, let's say you had a cognitive distortions list next to it. I'm sorry I didn't have one to provide for you now, but I kind of wanted you to be able to see me through this activity. And so we can make that available to people if they would like, or again, you can look it up online, or you can look it up through the app. That one is completely up to you. So, well, this is embarrassing. I totally forgot where I was. Does anybody remember what we were talking about a second ago? Cognitive list. Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're talking about the cognitive distortions. So when you identify the distortions, one of the things you can do is just like put a list on your refrigerator, take a screenshot of your phone, and when you have an anxious thought, look at the list and think, okay, is anything I'm thinking matching on this list? If it does match on this list, that might mean that it's coming from a place of anxiety. Oh, thank you so much for adding that in. That was beautiful. So you can look at the list and then you can be like, oh yes, this is definitely a cognitive distortion. It is falling on one of these lists. And in that minute, you can do like a breathing exercise or a grounding exercise, or that's where you can start to reframe, or you can just identify like, okay, this is coming from a place of anxiety. How do I want to handle this? And then kind of give yourself a break that way. Does anybody else want to throw out anything else that they've been kind of experiencing anxiety about that they might want to know how to reframe, or like a different way to manage? Sure. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's beautiful. All right. So I got germs. Are you talking about like germs in general, or things related to like COVID and what's happening now? Okay, COVID. All right. So this is one of the things that I thought maybe would be important for us to talk about, so we can kind of pivot and then go in that direction. Okay. So let's say, like I have to, social phobia. Okay. All right, speaking. Okay, got it. Okay, I think those are good. All right, so let's say the issue you're having with COVID in the moment is like, all right, I have to go to the grocery store, or I have to run an errand, or I have to go to work, right? Because because there are a lot of people who are having to go back to work, and there are a lot of people who are afraid because they're not exactly ready, or because it seems like maybe this isn't the thing we're supposed to be doing yet, and that is really scary for people. So here's one of the things you can do, right? First is to acknowledge that fear and that anxiety is healthy, right? Like it is okay for us to feel anxious, like some amounts of anxiety. It's okay for us to feel anxious. It's okay for us to be afraid. But something that we can do is still kind of manage, like, okay, one, what can you do to prepare, right? Like if you have mask, if you are washing your hands and trying not to touch your face, like if you're following the guidelines of what we're supposed to be doing to manage or try to keep ourselves safe and other people safe for this experience, then you have a little bit of preparation, right? If the issue is like, okay, I'm going to have to go into this space. Yeah, but what am I supposed to do about all the other people who aren't practicing the same thing that I am, right? So what you can do is recognize what it is, what fear, like what it is that you are afraid of happening. What is the anxiety? Like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'm going to touch the door, I'm going to talk to somebody. They're not going to be standing 6 feet away from me. And now I'm going to catch COVID and I'm going to bring it home and everything is going to be a disaster, right? Or that maybe you would get sick, or that you would infect loved ones, right? So we're still validating like that these anxieties are, that they're healthy and that it's okay that we have them, right? So, but we also have to, okay, so how would I do this one? All right, so if your fear was like, I'm going to get somebody sick, or I'm going to get sick, you could, and I'm sure you would have a lot of evidence that that would definitely be possible, but there could also be possibilities that that could not happen, right? And so even sometimes just adding in the possibility that it couldn't can be helpful, or this is going to be an annoying exercise, but figuring out what you would do if it did happen. Like, if you did get sick, then what would happen? Like, then it would be terrible. Then what if I had to go to the hospital? It's kind of playing a game of like one up, where you go back and forth between like thinking up the worst possible situation. So it's like the worst anxiety game ever. And then when you get to the end, which very possibly could be something like, and then I could die, or and then my family could die, and figuring out like, this is a really difficult one because of the because of how scary it is right now, I think. But the point of what I'm trying to tell you is that even though it sounds kind of crazy, if we can get to the point where we identify what our biggest fear is and sit with that for a little while and figure out what we would do if that happened, how would we be able to tolerate it? Who would we call? Yeah, basically acknowledging the fear. Yes, exactly. So like acknowledging that, and also allowing yourself to prepare for it, and giving yourself some other options for things that could happen, even if you feel like they're unlikely. And I think what's happening in this right now is that, because I also have anxiety, sometimes when I'm with sessions, if people say things that I'm like, yes, this seems very convincing, later I also have to check myself and say like, okay, but also it could not happen. Also, it could be okay. Also, I could go back to work. Somebody could try to get more than 6 feet like close to me, and I could tell them, excuse me, you're not respecting my personal distance. And then that might be another thing that we would have to work on. Like, what if I tell them that and they get mad? Like, well, you tell them that and they get mad, but you are able to set your boundaries in that way. And so it's okay for you to do that in whatever way you need to, so that you can feel safe. Okay. So then, okay, so somebody was talking about social phobia. So social phobia, okay, from what I've seen, a lot of experience of social phobia has to do with our fear of what other people are going to think or do about us, or about a situation, or about something that we've done, and beliefs that people aren't going to like us, that they're not going to, I mean, a lot of that, or that they're going to be mad at us, or like different things are going to happen. So for that specifically, the thing that I would suggest that someone do is, again, to like look at that cognitive distortion list, and in those, try to reframe it. Like, write down the sentence, like, I'm going to go to this meeting, and then like, I'm going to go to this meeting and nobody is going to talk to me. And so then something that you can do is say like, okay, that might be fortune telling, right? Because we don't actually know if we go to the meeting that nobody will talk to us. Or it could be catastrophizing, because if that's your worst case scenario, then it would be catastrophizing, because that we would automatically think of what the worst case scenario was. Or we would be mind reading, like knowing that we are next to somebody and thinking that because they look at us, that means that they don't like her. So because they don't look at us, that means that they don't, right? And so what you could do is kind of set up the sentence in a way that's like, okay, I could go to this meeting. I go to this meeting and they could like not take it well. They could not talk to me, or everything, they could take it well and they could talk to me. And so just like balancing out the thought. So you give another opportunity, another thought, the opportunity to exist there, so that you can kind of continue on that way. I hope that was helpful. If you have any more questions, you can definitely let me know. We have a few more minutes, I think, for one of these kinds of exercises. Did anybody else have anything that they kind of wanted to throw out there for something that they might come in with about? Okay. Oh, all right. This is a fucking beautiful one. Okay, so somebody asked, what about morbid, intrusive thoughts that seem to be completely random? For example, fear of killing someone in a car accident, etc. Okay, this is a beautiful question, because we think thoughts like that all the time. Like, there's a book, and I can't remember what it is right now. I'm so sorry. It was one of the other counselor's office, but this was about like obsessive compulsive disorder. But also when I read it, I was like, this is amazing because it had a list of all of the intrusive, morbid thoughts that people think most often. Like when you're driving in your car, I don't know if this happens to y'all, but I mean, I have anxiety, so it happens to me. I'm driving my car and I'm like, man, what would happen if my car just rammed into the side of the road? That would suck. Or if I have like a thought that, what if somebody dies? Or like, sometimes people will have thoughts that they're very ashamed of, like if it's something that's like, what if somebody else is injured? Or like, one, I had a client, I mean, not one, a few of them, who they feel really ashamed when they have thoughts about, like, I had a thought and I thought like I wanted to, one of them was to like poke somebody in the hand with a fork or whatever, like just things that come out of nowhere, right? And the really important thing, again, there to remember is that the thoughts are just thoughts. And there are so many people who experience intrusive thoughts like that. Like the ones that we think, I cannot tell anybody about this thought because they're going to think I'm real crazy. They probably have them too. Like everybody, it's everybody. So the more we can kind of just get into like, this is the intrusive thought, accepting that as it is, it becomes a little bit lighter because we don't have to carry it around like it's something that we're doing because our brain is being crazy and we're bad. Like everybody thinks intrusive thoughts that come from all kinds of places, about all kinds of, even sometimes when we think bad things about the people we love, right? That's something that I've noticed that people experience also. Like while like they'll think something about their partner and then they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that thing. Does that mean I don't love them? Maybe I don't like them anymore. Should we break up? Is this terrible? Am I a bad partner? But if you have that thought and then you're able to just tell yourself like, oh, I had that thought, cool, and then like move on to, or like refocusing on what you're doing. And I think this is an excellent way for us to kind of segue into how you can refocus, because the thing that happens when we have intrusive thoughts is that if we don't if we don't catch them, then they become obsessive, right? Like it's just something that, because of the way we think about it, like this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, what if, what if, what if, what if, what if. And so a really good exercise for that is grabbing anything that's around you, like a pen or pods or water bottle or whatever, and then giving yourself, like timing yourself for 1 minute, and then for that 1 minute using your senses to describe what this thing is, right? Like, okay, so I've got this thing, right now it's cold, right? It's cold and it's white and it clicks and doesn't smell like anything except my nail polish. Normally, if it was something we could taste, I would be like, what does it taste like? But I'm not going to lick this in front of everybody because I don't want to become an Instagram meme. I don't even know what would happen, but see, because of the anxiety. So whatever. So, but I kind of trailed off, right? And that's one of the parts. We do a minute and then we go back to the thing and we kind of describe it, right? Like I'm describing this using all of my senses. Normally this is a little more focused of an exercise, but I'm kind of trying to get through it. So I make sure that we have time for whatever questions you might have. The thing is, when we are able to pick something like this, like something small, tactile, this is something that you can do on your own, in a class, in a meeting, whatever, just focus on that using your senses for 1 minute. And I think you'll notice that in doing that, what happens when we really, really focus on something is that we don't get distracted by the intrusive thoughts or the obsessive thoughts, and we're able to come back into the present, right? So, and you can do that with whatever. And sometimes because I have ADHD and because I have ADHD, and I think this works well with people who have social anxiety also. Maybe not like 100% of the time, but based on the clients I've talked to, it seems like it's pretty effective, is if you use this exercise with the person that you're talking to, right? So instead of doing it with this, I would look at whoever it is that I'm in the conversation with, and I would focus on what their face looks like, or what their mouth looks like when they're talking, or what their voice sounds like, or what it is that they're wearing. And I would kind of lean in and try to refocus myself into the present. Because one of the issues with anxiety, again, is that when we are in anxious thinking patterns, we are not with the people that we're trying to be with, because we're in the future about things that might happen or things that have happened or things that have happened in the past. And so we're not able to stay in the present with people because we're following those anxious thoughts wherever it is that they'll take us. Yeah, anxiety wins the passive. Yeah, that's exactly that's exactly what happens. So that exercise is really good for like refocusing you into the conversation so that you don't have to be in those anxious thoughts. This is not something that you're going to do like one refocus and then you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm a focusing queen. Maybe I'm just saying that because I have ADHD. So for me, I'll do that and then the intrusive thoughts will come back. I'll go to other places and then I'll have to like redo it again. And so that's something that that you will kind of continuously have to practice. But these are all things that you can use. These are all things that you can use in those moments, like as you're needed. Another suggestion that I have is like for the exercise we talked about today, I know we've kind of covered a lot, but like if with your therapist, or if you want to look on Pinterest or Google for some of these skills like anxiety management techniques or for whatever, make like a list, right? So as you practice things, keep it on your phone or on a piece of paper and start listing the things that actually worked for you. So like reframing worked for me, or grounding worked for me, or playing lawyer and judge worked for me, or seeing if I have any evidence for the anxious thought works for me, because I sometimes have no evidence at all for anything. That happens a lot, right? But I'm like, well, it seems obvious because that's where my brain went, but that's not exactly what happens. So you write down all of the list of the things that happen, and then you go through them, right? Because just because something happened, something works one time, if the anxiety is being real that day, it's not gonna, like, it might not work. That one might not work this time. So then you have to go to the next one. Maybe this one works. Then you go to the next one. Maybe this one works. And then you kind of switch them back and forth. So you like build up kind of an arsenal, right? And then in that you have a lot of options for ways to manage different things. And you can figure out what works the best for you, right? And keep those. And I'm sure that there have been things, because you've been living with this for a long time, that you've already learned that can get you out of the places where you're having trouble getting out of your head. And that's something that's been really useful for me personally, and something that I think is important for clients, because not everything works all the time, but then we have some tools, and eventually something should work or could work, or will at least get you to 50%, or a place that's like tolerable, right? Because sometimes when our anxiety is like at 10, we might not get to 0, but maybe we could get to 5, and then maybe we could get to 3, Okay, somebody asked me, we're going to switch into questions right now. Also, I'm really sorry to do this. You can definitely leave the presentation. I'm going to go a little bit over, probably like 10 minutes, just because of who I am as a person. And because once I start getting really into this, I get really excited. So we're going to go into questions now for a few minutes. For about 10 minutes, and then we're going to kind of close up. Right before we do that, I'm going to tell you about some of my favorite apps for anxiety. So one of the things somebody asked was, what about trying to ignore the thought instead of coming up with more neutral thoughts? Aren't you making thoughts important this way? Okay, this is a really, really beautiful thing for you to ask. And that's because even though it seems like the greatest thing to do for anxious thoughts or uncomfortable thoughts is to try to push it away, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because when we try to push away the intrusive thought, like let's say I had an intrusive thought about like, I don't know, what was the last intrusive thought that I had? I'm sure I feel like sometimes there's so many that I'm like, it just kind of is overwhelming. So let's say the intrusive thought was like, oh, that person's mad at me. Oh no, I have a good one. Let's say it's about an ex, right? And they keep popping up into your head and you're like, I can't stop thinking about this freaking thing. This is so annoying, or it's something that you're worried about. The more you're like, I'm not going to think about this thing. I'm not going to think about this thing. I'm not going to think about this thing. You're still strengthening connections between you and thinking about the thing, because you're adding, it's like you thought about the thing and then you're adding, I'm not thinking about this thing. So those, like that connection kind of gets more strong. So instead, if you have the thought, and then you're like, oh, here's a thought. I'm thinking about my ex, or I'm thinking about whatever the intrusive thought is. Cool. And then you just kind of let it go. I know that's easier said than done. But then like thinking about that. Cool, that's fine. And then go back to the thing that you're doing, right? Like if you allow it, it'll give it less power. And then over time, the intrusive thought may show up less. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So does anybody, I'm opening it for a little bit more or different kinds of questions on. Does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about, or any other kind of questions they have about managing any of these things or anything specifically? Let's see. Oh, okay. Here's a good one. How do you stop fighting with someone when you are with a loved one when you are anxious and they don't understand and want you to stop? I'm assuming that means when they don't understand that you're anxious and they want you to stop. God, that one is so annoying. When they're like, why can't you just be anxious? Or you're like the choice one, that one's my favorite. Like, okay, well, if I had a choice about it, I probably choose not to live like this. You know what I mean? So understand that kind of struggle. I think in those moments, like, okay, one of the things like we cannot control other people's responses to us, right? Like that's just something that we can't do, but we can control our own, right? So knowing that it is okay for you to be anxious is important. And I know that sometimes we understand that and other people don't. So maybe if you need like a 5-minute break, if they're kind of talking to you about something that you're uncomfortable with, if they're like demeaning the anxiety, like, or invalidating it, I think that happens a lot with people. We can also use direct communication to tell people what we need in these moments. And that's another really good thing, right? So when we're anxious, sometimes what happens is that we need something, right? And when we're talking to somebody about it, we need them to respond in a specific way. And occasionally, the way people think that they have to respond is by solving the problem for us. So we do not want for them to solve the problem for us. So one thing that you can do going into it is like, hey, I'm going to talk to you about this thing, but I really don't need you to solve this for me. I'm just kind of telling you about it. Or we can tell them exactly what we do need. Like, hey, I'm going to talk to you about this thing. And I'd like for you to say, like, whatever it is. Like, I would like for you to respond in this way. Or I need, well, the only thing that I need is a hug. Or I need for you to be supportive. Like, or I need for you to say this, not that. And we can give people those instructions. I think sometimes we either don't want to impose on people, or we assume that people are going to know what it is that we need. And people rarely know exactly what we need. So then what happens is we come up to them because we have some kind of an issue, and then they don't give us the response we want, and then we're upset, and then they're upset. And sometimes these things can be solved if we just give people really clear expectations of what the issue is. Like, for example, I have this issue with my mom, who sometimes is like, why are you taking so many medicines for the things that you're doing? And I'm like, this drives me fucking, sorry, I was supposed to, but this drives me crazy, right? Or if people are like, well, why don't you just stop being anxious about it? And so sometimes I'll have a funny response like, that's an excellent idea. We'll definitely go ahead and try that now. Or sometimes I'll have to tell her, maybe not in the moment, but later, like, hey, whenever this happens, I feel kind of like I'm feeling kind of shamed, or really, I'd like for you to respond in this way and not that way. Like when you say that you want me to get over it, like I feel sad about that, or I feel like I'm not listened to, and I would really appreciate it if you would just kind of like listen and let me process with you, because I think a lot of times what we're trying to do is share with people. We don't necessarily need for them to tell us what to do. I hope that was helpful and was related to the question that you were, or about the question that you were answering. Okay, what else do we have? What if they refuse to listen? Well, I think then we anxious people. Oh, if people refuse to listen, then the people who are anxious are on their own. You mean like if you decide to be vulnerable and tell somebody about what they're doing, and or what they're doing that's hurting you, and then they're not really receptive to that. I think that happens also. And then in those, oh, that was a really good idea. That's hard. And sometimes you have to find someone who can fill that role. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Because we really don't have control over the way that other people respond. And sometimes they're really not, you know, like they're not going to get, and they're not going to be there for us in the way that we need for them to be. Especially if it's something you've tried to tell them before and they're kind of not paying attention, then finding support in the other places that you need is an excellent, that was beautiful. Yeah, that was a good one. Okay. So does anybody else have any questions before we before we wrap up for tonight? Okay, I know I threw a lot of information out there. I told you that I was going to tell you about the apps that I found to be, the apps that I found to be the most helpful. Okay, so for me personally, when I start to feel really anxious, the thing I like to do is immediately figure out how to not feel that way. And one of the ways that I do that is with a lot of therapy techniques, and then also with apps. So again, there's one app that's called Sanbello. That's Sanbello. That is the app that I use, and also an app that I recommend to clients because the thought exercises on that app are gold. And they also do like meditation exercises, but the thought exercises in that are like CBT related. And so it'll help walk you through the things that we were talking about today. That app is really good. Headspace is a really good app for meditation. And the reason that I think that, not just me, but the reason that Headspace, or that meditation and mindfulness is good for people with anxiety is, one, because it helps us to manage like just the anxious physical and emotional sensations. But two is because practicing awareness of our thoughts helps us to become more aware of them as we're having them, so that we can actually reframe them when they come up. Because if we aren't doing that as we go, it's more difficult to catch ourselves when we're having anxious thoughts. Another app I really like is one that's called, my phone's dead, but the app is called GGRO. That one's for like anxiety that you might have about relationship. So the GG apps are, I'm going to look one up like right now, then I'm going to put it in this thing. The GG apps are great. They're specifically designed for people who are experiencing OCD, but I found that they really, really help with anxiety also, because in OCD, there's a lot of anxiety, right? There's intrusive thoughts, there's obsessive thoughts. And so if you go to the website OpenGG, wait, is this it? No, this is not it. Sorry, I should have found this one before. OCD. Okay, here we go. If you go to ggapps.net, .net. Okay, those apps, and they have like different ones, help with like intrusive thoughts, obsessive thoughts, thoughts about like intrusive or obsessive thoughts about body image, relationship issues, depression, self-esteem. And what it is like a game that you play for, it only lets you do 3 rounds, so it's really short, and it brings up a thought, and then you pull the positive thought towards you and push the negative thought away, right? And as you're doing that, it helps, one, to identify what some of the thoughts we're having are, because the first time I did that, I was like, weird, I had no idea that I was thinking that I could not tolerate things that were uncertain. And that's what a lot of anxiety is, right? Like the inability to feeling like we are unable to tolerate doubt and uncertainty. And so those apps are super helpful for helping you to like identify the thoughts that you're having and to practice noticing them and then pushing them away. And then that's something that you're kind of able to do in your everyday life. That one I think is super, super helpful. Yeah, that one's really good for especially like intrusive thoughts that we're having, or for any of those issues that I mentioned. And those have really been my personally my go-tos, but also things that I think could be really helpful for other people. Okay, so all right, so then I think if nobody has any other questions, then we're going to go ahead and close up for today. I wanted to say that I kind of email us the book that you were talking about. Oh, I can see about doing that. We can definitely put it somewhere. This presentation they're going to put online. I will ask the other therapists about which one it was and then see what we can do about doing that. And I would text her right now, except that my phone's dead. My bad. But I will definitely remember to do that and then see what we can do. Also, if you want, if anybody who wants the book specifically will just put their email address in the chat thing, I'll figure out what the book is and I'll send you an email directly. I don't know why I didn't think about that until just right now. No problem. Okay. So then, all right. So I know that that was a lot of information. Things that I really want you to take away from this are really that your thoughts are just thoughts, and that it's okay if you have like if you have the intrusive thought, or because putting more pressure on that is going to make going to kind of build with the anxiety, and that you can build your toolbox of these things, and that even if they might not work sometimes, they will work during other times, or they can kind of help to decrease a little bit at a time. But with anxiety, a little bit of decrease is still super helpful. I have generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, and most recently PTSD, which has been a really fun ride. But it's also something that I'm kind of working through. And so I know that sometimes, I get it, it's so hard. It can be so hard, but also some of these things can be managed so well. And the reason that I told y'all, when you start practicing them, to start practicing them hard, go at it for 2 weeks. When you have anxious thoughts, do the journaling, try to do in this umbrella, it'll walk you through the reframe again. Because you will pick up how to be able to do it in your head more quickly. And then it can just be so helpful, and really you can eventually learn to be really good at that in a way that then later things just let's say my thing was catastrophization, and that was the thought I wanted to work on. If I focused on that one, eventually I might not have so much of an issue with that. Or sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, but we're able to manage those a little, actually not a little bit, considerably more. Let's see. Is OCD different from generalizing? Y'all are so wonderful. OCD is different from generalized anxiety. And so that's why I said when I was using the OCD book, I was learning about the OCD book, but it still had a lot of helpful tools, but there are other books for generalized anxiety that you can get specifically. OCD is a little bit different because if you were having an intrusive thought with generalized anxiety, and then we also had an obsessive thought, we might not have a compulsion to do something about it. Whereas people with OCD might feel like if they did something, then they would be able to prevent something from happening. And so it's a little bit different. At a baseline, that's the way. It is definitely more complicated than that. If you're looking into, from Eden's Counseling, somebody who might be able to help you with that, Kristen Gallion, she's on our website. She specializes in that, and she's awesome. So that might be somebody to kind of look into. It is possible to do EMDR virtually. That's something that we've kind of been transitioning to in this period. It's a little bit different because we might not use eye movements, and sometimes eye movements are more effective for people, but we can use tapping, or we can use different kinds of tools that might be okay. So if you wanted to try doing that and then it didn't work for you this way, maybe we could figure out a way to do eye movements later, but it's not something that's totally outside the realm of. It's something that I'm doing with clients right now, and it seems I think it's going pretty well, so that's good. So OCD or anxiety cause mood changes. Oh yeah, hell yeah. Yes. ADHD, anxiety, OCD, all of these things really affect our mood, because our thoughts affect our mood, and also because sometimes our brain is just able to send us signals so that we'll be in a terrible mood for however long, for whatever reason that it does that. And so all of those are definitely very impacted by mood, like mood, irritability, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. How could your clients that take medication and anxiety learn to work through it? That really, the next question was how, and this is going to be the last question, I think, and then we're going to kind of have to wrap it up because I actually have a session I'm supposed to be getting to. Sorry, guys. But how often do your clients that take medication for anxiety learn to work through it enough they can get off the medication? So that is that is an individual basis thing, and I honestly don't have a number for it, but I think what happens is that like your decision to take medication is definitely up to you. If you feel like you get to a place where you kind of want to try things with that, then you should definitely talk to your psychiatrist. People are able to work through these things, and then they feel better, and so then maybe they want to talk to them. I would never suggest just getting off of whatever medication that you're on for anxiety. But I mean, management with both can be the most effective. If that's something that you're trying to do, then it's not something that's impossible. It is something that people do. I would just make sure that that's the greatest choice for you. And that would be something to talk to your counselor or to your psychiatrist about. But people who take SSRIs don't have to take them for the rest of their life. Some people who take SSRIs do. Like at the moment, I fully intend to because I feel way better when I do take it. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel when I'm 50, but right now that's where I'm at. So that's it. I could definitely talk about doing a virtual informational type of group. That kind of seems cool. Or I'll ask my supervisor about that. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up for today. I want to thank y'all so much for coming and for attending and for participating. I know that again, that it was a lot of information. If you'd like to make an appointment with me or with any of the other counselors, you can do that through the online portal. I think some of you may already be clients, which is awesome. And if you would like to be, you can do that. You can also go to the website and then email the admin. The website's like at the top of the page. I mean, the email address is at the top of the page. If you'd like to talk to them about booking appointments. And I know that our admin sent out an email so that people could do, what are those things called whenever you, like a feedback thing? I can't remember what the word for that is. Thank you guys so much. Y'all were so awesome. I really appreciate that. The feedback form. So he sent it to you an email. If you could complete that, that would be awesome. Also, I'm gonna attach a link that has that for you in case you wanted to do it that way. Except I have 1 million tabs open because of who I am as a person. So I'm gonna put that in here as soon as we are done with that. No, as far as a special diet that helps anxiety, I haven't really read into anything. I read a book one time called the serotonin power diet that had to do specifically with people who experienced weight gain after taking SSRIs for anxiety, or how to possibly manage some of that because of SSRI weight gain. So if that's something that you're looking at, maybe that would be a good place to start. But if not, that's not something that I've come across so far. Oh yeah, I haven't tried the anti-anxiety diet, so I'm not sure if that one has worked, but it could be something I'll try next because I like to try all kinds of things. Yeah, so if that's something that you want to try, and if it seems like, I would do a little bit, like just a little bit of research to see like where that information came from to make sure that it's like evidence-based. But then once you do that, whatever you want to try, check with your doctor, and then your anxiety treatment is definitely your own. So and we are a team that's here to support you in whatever it is that you would need. Again, I want to thank you all for joining me today. And yeah, then I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and end the call now if nobody else has any. Bye. Yay, bye. Thanks so much. Y'all were awesome.